and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Today, my guest is Dr. Christine Copper, who is the faculty athletics representative at the United States Naval Academy, which in and of itself is a fascinating topic, but we won't go there just yet. She was the very first faculty athletics representative on the NCAA Division I Board of Directors, and at the time was also the FAR representative to the Division I National Student Athlete Advisory Committee. She co-chaired the NCAA working group on values-based revenue distribution that brought historic change to the NCAA's financial distribution model by including academic incentives for the first time ever. And oh, by the way, she is the past president of the Faculty Athletics Representative Association. In the meantime, she's also a chemistry professor at the United States Naval Academy, and she was appointed to the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics in 2018, and to date is the only FAR to serve on that board. So a person of first. Christine, welcome to the podcast.
Karen, thank you so much for the great introduction. I look forward to talking to you this afternoon a bit.
And we do have a dog in the background, just so you know, so we may have an occasional bark and adding of that to the conversation as well. So, but we'll start with becoming the Navy's FAR back in 2008, and you served on something called the Naval Academy Athletic Association Board of Control. Walk us through those two roles on campus and what responsibilities they entail.
So the faculty athletic representative responsibilities at Navy are similar to what they are elsewhere. Our three areas of influence and interest are institutional control of athletics, student athlete well-being, and academic integrity of athletics. So all those things are things that I work on at the Naval Academy. And then as part of that, our athletic association is actually a nonprofit corporation. So because it's a real challenge with government budgets and the unpredictability of those, to try to run a Division I athletics program just with government funding. So many years ago, the athletic department was created as a standalone 501(c) nonprofit corporation. But it is very tied to the academy. So the athletic director is the president of the corporation, but he still is directly reports to the admiral, right, our president. So the board of control is the corporate board of that nonprofit corporation. So that's perhaps one of the more interesting things I never thought I would be doing as an FAR, was to be sitting on the corporate board of a nonprofit. So we look at a lot of budgetary things. We look at we were working on our agreement that allows the NAAA, the Athletic Association, to run the way it does, and how it's connected to the academy, and to always make sure we're in compliance with all the federal regulations with that. And then we also, as part of that board, I chair the policy committee of the board, which essentially acts as an athletics committee or an athletics council would act at maybe a regular college, is what I like to call the rest of the world. So again, it's, the faculty athletic rep job here is, it's a little bit different just because of that nonprofit corporation piece. But again, the areas of student athlete well-being is probably why all of us got into the faculty athletic rep business. But then institutional control is something that, we have to be mindful of and be monitoring, and then also any kind of academic and eligibility concerns as well.
And you said that your budget comes from the government. So how does an athletic director, do you have a sense of, do they need to raise additional money as well? Is there a large fundraising component? Or is it mostly, this is what we're asking for, and as you told me earlier, it's either the education or building a battleship? I mean, the choices here.
Yeah, so the budget of the Naval Academy itself comes from the government. But again, in order to run a very successful Division I athletic program, which is in the charter of the nonprofit corporation, you will run a Division I program. The Athletic Association has to be pretty much self-sustaining and work with donor dollars. So there are some funds that come from the Naval Academy's budget from the federal government. But I think typically the AD talks of it in terms of about 93% of the funds that are used for the athletic program are either fundraised or are, funds that we earn by way of, football, basketball, whatever, ticket sales and such. So there is a huge donor component to it. And then also just like any other school trying to get fans and corporate sponsors and such to power the machine.
That's pretty amazing. 93%. Wow. That's a lot. I mean, you hear of schools that are athletic departments that are 75% dependent on student fees or donations. That's a really high number.
Yeah, there's a student fee piece, but it's not high. It's not like you see in the, when a lot of the students are realizing these fees exist and are trying to question them.
Right.
So there's a little bit of that piece. And again, that kind of counts as some of the money from the federal side, since our students are all paid by the government to come to school. So it's essentially funneled over to athletics, but it's not a large portion. And yeah, it's amazing to watch the athletic program with 33 varsity sports, and those students, that's a third of our student body plays in our varsity athletic program. To watch it be so self-sustaining, our athletic director has done wonders in that arena.
Wow, that's a very interesting challenge for him as a leader to be able to sustain that. So when we think about the FAR role on other campuses, that FAR navigates the academic issues on behalf of the athletics department while keeping the president, provost, admiral informed of internal and national issues. How does that compare to your role at the Naval Academy? I imagine the chain of command becomes an issue. If so, how do you navigate it?
I think the chain of command is helpful because, quite honestly, I'm one of the few faculty members, if I think the only one, who can say my chain of command in this role as the FAR is me straight to the admiral in charge of the institution, right? Because I was appointed by him to be the FAR. Now, our provost was part of the selection process, as was the AD, right? They both had to be comfortable with the person in this position. And prior to even meeting with either of them, I had to make it through a faculty senate selection process, basically. So it, our academic side pretty much runs like regular college. We have deans of our 3 different schools and department chairs, and our provost is in charge of all the academics. So nothing's really particularly different in the chain of command piece, other than the fact that maybe as an FAR, I have plenty of access to all the different admirals that I've served under. I think maybe that's the biggest difference, is that our admirals typically serve for 4 years.
Okay.
And then they're on their way and then they retire. So that maybe is a little different, although more recently it seems that college presidents' terms are kind of, I think the average length of a college president now is like 6 years. So other FARs may have more turnover in their bosses as well.
That's really interesting. So everybody clearly understands on campus that you have the right to go see the admiral. Nobody's saying, hey, why doesn't she go to the provost first? They know that they understand that role.
Absolutely. And I'm very lucky that the athletic director is very supportive of what I do. And he knows I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and he knows I'm going to say no to things that I don't think are a good idea. And he has invited me every week. For 12 years as the FAR, I've sat at his senior staff meeting every single week. So he's allowed me all the access I need to have the opportunity to know what's going on and be helpful to the students in the end.
And you were telling me earlier that you yourself are a former student athlete, so you know what the experience should look like. And is that how you guide your thinking when you're sitting in those senior staff meetings?
I do. I mean, the Naval Academy, I had a Division III athletic career. I was a tennis player, and, our coaches in Division III they couldn't make it all about athletics, right? Because there wasn't a scholarship that we were beholden to. That happens at the Naval Academy, right? We can't make it all about athletics. We can't have students there that their main priority is athletics. They have to graduate in 4 years. They have to take, they all graduate with a Bachelor of Science degree. So they have to take a pretty large core curriculum or general education requirements, as you might consider them. And then they follow a major as well. So they're very busy, and they've got a lot to take care of in terms of their military obligations as well. So I think I can understand, even though I didn't go here, I can understand the situation here in the fact that that it can't just be about the sport, and you have to recruit to the institution, not just to the team. And then I do appreciate, as an FAR, the fact that I do have coaches who know that. So I can have pretty easy conversations with coaches with regard to missed class time or support for students and so forth, because, we try to treat all our students as midshipmen first and not athletes first. And, because that's the only way they're going to be able to finish our program successfully. And then, we're going to give them all a job. Right. And I always think of it as, I don't really want you to fly a plane over my house if you didn't do everything you were supposed to do at the Naval Academy.
Right. Me neither. So one of the things that you think about, again, the Naval Academy is a Division I program, and so many other Division I programs we've heard or witnessed over the years, exceed greatly the 20 hours a week of practice that the NCAA allows. How do you manage that in the life of a midshipman? I mean, is it truly 20 hours in season, out of season, or is there a set schedule that the athlete goes through in season, out of season? Explain that to us.
Yeah, I think, when I talk to if we have recruits on campus and I'm talking to them about our academic program, one of the things I mention is that it's kind of nice that this is one of the few places where there is time for athletics that we cannot schedule any academic things. Although you as an athlete can miss my academic class for your athletic travel, right? And as a faculty member, I'm okay with that, because again, we keep travel to a minimum and it's very well managed. But the beauty of the Naval Academy is every day after school, there's a sports period where all the midshipmen are doing something. And if you add in our club sport athletes, you get to half of the student body. And then the other half is part of a robust intramural program that they all have to participate in. So it's very difficult for our coaches to even get to the 20 hours a week, let alone exceed it, because they have this window after school where the students are all available, basically from 4 o'clock until about 6:30. And then, they might do a lift or some film over lunch, or, the crew team will be on the water in the morning and so forth. But, that's another thing our coaches have to understand. It's good news. You're guaranteed to have your players during that afternoon block because no one else can schedule there. But then when 7 o'clock comes, there's military obligations. And when 8 o'clock at night comes, there's study hour. So it's very compartmentalized, but it's very scripted. And I think we just all understand the mission of the Academy is moral, mental, and physical. So each one gets its time and can't get in the way of the others.
So there's, I guess it's understood then that other members of your conference, the Patriot League, might not have as rigid a daily schedule. They might have more room for coaches to take a little bit more time, but that's okay. And that's how coaches are evaluated under those restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we can come close to the 20 hours. I don't think we're missing out on a lot. And again, it depends sport by sport. But I also, that's why I'm glad we're in the Patriot League, because I believe the schools in the Patriot League are all functioning as we are, maybe not with the strict chunks of time prescribed in terms of, the afternoons or sports period kind of thing. But I believe those are also students who are very academically involved, and, maybe they have a lab that doesn't schedule and they have to go to lab instead of practice or whatever it is. I feel like competing in the Patriot League, the other students at the other schools are probably in similar situations where their coaches can't obligate tons of time. And the focus of the league is definitely an academic as much as athletic focus. I don't think coaches would want to try to abuse the time use too much time with their students and put them at a disadvantage academically.
Yeah, and especially with the 4-year requirement. And you mentioned earlier that that's one of the reasons why faculty members are given more time to give one-on-one to students to make sure that they're able to progress through and graduate in 4 years. That is a really big deal. And that's a very different philosophy than so many other Division I programs.
It is. And we, typical college, you graduate with about 120 credits. All of our majors add up to about 140 credits. Wow. That you have to finish in 4 years. And again, some of that is the core curriculum has a lot of lab hours to it because it's technically focused, but also the military coursework that they do. So, our students are taking 18, 19 credits a semester. and they can't really, drop out of things because they'll get behind. So, we have a lot of support in place to make sure they can get to the other end. Our graduation rate is always somewhere in the 90 and above %, right? So, we want to hire our students into our Navy and Marine Corps jobs. So we do what we need to do to help them to be successful. And, as long as they try, we'll try, right? It's very difficult to invest everything we've invested in these students and have them come here and depend on them to become an officer. We don't take it lightly to say, oh, well, we'll just, weed them out and use the ones that are left, right? We really think we've brought students who can be successful, and we'll do everything we can without lowering any standards to have them get to the finish line.
Sure. Very important that you do that. Let's shift gears to the committees that you served on in the NCAA. This values-based revenue distribution committee first. And for those who don't know, I think it was 3 years ago when the NCAA started distributing funds based on academic performance. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
So give us just a quick snapshot of why that was important and what kind of dollars we're talking about.
Yeah, so that committee, I ended up co-chairing that working group because I was a member of the board of directors at the time. So it was a committee or a working group that had presidents and a few athletic directors. And we were trying to change behavior. If you're familiar with the revenue distribution, the biggest chunks of money you can get were by winning men's games in men's basketball. Right. And that really was the payoff to your conference. And then your conference divided it however their prescription was. So we wanted to change behavior. We didn't want folks to be doing things that were, basketball focused because that's where the money was. So the idea was to come up with a way that we could have people chase dollars academically. Right. So we worked for a while. We tried to use measures that already existed. So that's why we ended with some criteria for getting that money based on the APR that was already in place and the GSR rates that are already reported. We looked at a lot of data, and we looked at making sure we weren't going to disenfranchise schools that were low revenue schools. And we wanted to make sure that it was fair on campus. So each team counted the same. You couldn't have some teams that were academically underperforming, but cancel them out with a big team that does better or whatever it is. So we wanted to make sure it was all kind of changing behavior, right? And the money starts off small. I think last year was actually the first year they distributed. And by the calculations we did at the time, the prediction was about $50,000 for the unit the first year. But by the time it went out, not too many years, it's almost $500,000. And the unit's the same size as a basketball unit, right? So it's real money. And that growth was going to be pretty quick. I don't recall the exact number of years, but it was like 2024, maybe by then it was going to be similar to a basketball unit, which is, if I found it on the street, I'd pick it up. Right. And I think behavior changed, right? It was kind of interesting as soon as the membership and by way of the board of directors approved our proposal for this academic unit. Consultants were being hired to go to conferences to talk about how we're going to get our APR for this team up or that team up, because now there was money. So it wasn't, let's just make sure our APR is high enough to play in the postseason. This was, let's make sure our APR is high enough to get this academic unit. So I think our goal was reached. I think at the time I was a little concerned. We were a little too much on the everybody gets a trophy side with the metrics that we set. But we didn't want to err on the side of nobody's going to try because it's futile, right? Yeah. So to me, and knowing the APR just constantly climbs, which again, not a bad thing, but at the time I was a little, we could have made it a little harder to get, but we changed behavior. So the more people get it, the smaller the unit ends up being. But again, right. It's big money, and it'll track what the basketball wins are. So instead of just constantly, doing things for a basketball win, now you can do things academically or graduation rates to to make sure you get enough money to then maybe put back in. And then if you're getting that money, you put it back into the students and help them perform.
That's what I was going to ask you. So does it go back into like academic counseling or other support services, tutoring, that type of thing? Or is it intended to fund a specific area?
We didn't prescribe it to fund a specific area, but the only hope was that if you have, if you have more money and you're trying to make sure you keep getting that money, you put it into the things that get you there.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense. You were also part of the National Student Athlete Advisory Committee. Now that's been around for what, 8 or 9 years now, a national committee, or longer? I can't remember.
Quite honestly, I don't know the history of it. It's been there since I've been afar for 12 years. So I think it goes back quite a ways.
So these are representatives, I think, from all the different conferences that come together and talk about some of the national issues that student athletes are facing. What were some of your takeaways from that experience?
Yeah, so I asked to be the faculty athletic rep liaison to that group because I was sitting on the board of directors, and I really felt like I needed to know what the students were thinking. And I felt it very strongly because my school is so much different than others. And I felt like I needed to talk to regular students and find out what's going on in the regular world of athletics. So I also stepped up to serve as the faculty rep to the students in the American Athletic Conference on their SAC, so I could learn more about their experiences, because again, that's quite different than the Patriot League even. So it was neat to be there with them. They're amazing young people that are going to go and do amazing things. I think what I learned most is if you give them a tasking, they'll do it. And if you ask them for their opinion, they will settle on a pretty reasonable opinion. I somewhere after the values-based working group, but before I was, my term was up on the board, I was on the transfer working group 3.0 or whichever one it was. And we had 2 student athletes on there, and a great example of their influence was they and voicing the thoughts from their colleagues in National SAC were saying, look, if you make this transfer portal, there needs to be some responsibility on the student side too. It can't be they just put their name in the portal and on a Wednesday because they're unhappy. There needs to be some responsibility, or they have to have some skin in the game. So they were actually the ones who came up with the idea that the students would be relinquishing their scholarship at the end of that term if they entered the portal. And that was interesting to see the students themselves trying to make sure that they understood students want things, but they also understood that, students have to have some accountability or it's not going to work. So that idea actually had come from them. And now that idea is kind of under fire a little bit, but I thought it was a pretty mature thing they came to for that. And again, that's just one example of working with them, but, they meet for 3 days at a time, 3 times a year, and I would sit with them for all those days and was thankful for it. And I definitely learned more from them than they ever got out of me. But they tackled the tough issues. They did time demands and a lot of work on that when I was in there. And then now they're, talking a lot about the name, image, and likeness. And a lot of their ideas are to be able to bring education to athletes on campuses so they understand what the issues are and what their responsibilities are, or how to not get themselves caught up in some kind of violation. But they also, since I was with them, got seats at the table, right? There was the leader of the group was always sitting there on the board with me. The 2 of them were always at the Division I Council, where a lot of the more operational things get decided, and they were listened to in those rooms. When the student spoke, they listened more than when the FAR spoke.
It's interesting. There's so much more we could ask about that, but I can't not ask you about all of this coming to bear from the Supreme Court with the Alston case, the NIL legislation that's coming down, and the potential, realistic idea that athletes will be able to make money off their names, images, and likenesses. Some legislators desire to have the NCAA get a partial antitrust exemption or some sort of immunity protection. Where do FARs and also the FARA, the National Association, how do they provide input into some of these issues on campus, in the conference, and nationally?
So in my experience with the FARA organization especially, and then there's kind of a matching organization for the FBS FARs, the D1A FAR group. I've been active with both of those groups throughout the years. Typically when a big issue like that comes up, it's front and center with those FARs, and they'll come up with their thoughts and agree on those, through a series of, commenting and so forth. And then those will go as part of the feedback to whatever working group is working on it in the structure. So, and in recent years, I was able to serve on the board because they added a FAR position, and there's 2 FARs on the council. And then, as they spin up these different working groups, they've added FARs. I think there was an FAR, there were a couple FARs in the mix for the discussions about the name, image, and likeness kind of things. So we do have FARs in the room, but typically the governance structure, a call goes out for comment, and it goes out, what's the conference position?
Okay.
And then the conferences will push that to the school. So the schools will voice their thoughts to the conference. The conference will submit thoughts. So the FARs on their own campus can be part of the discussion by way of their own school or by way of their campus or their conference FARs. But then separately, those 2 associations of FARA and the 1A FAR, in my experience, many times we wrote kind of a position paper and pushed that in as, here's what these organizations of FARs think.
Okay. Okay. You must spend some time then polling your colleagues on campus to see what their takes are, or do you feel like they just aren't engaged enough to be able to give a really good opinion?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I haven't asked the faculty at large at the Naval Academy what they think about paying a student for their name, image, and likeness.
Yeah.
Especially during a pandemic, I think people would be like, what is that? What? I'm just trying to make my Zoom get off. Right? So I don't. I think I'm the most educated voice on our campus from the faculty, just by my position and by my interest in this position and by all the time I spend trying to keep track of everything. But I will have conversations with our provost at times as the leader of our faculty. But typically many of these issues, again, a lot of them don't even affect the Naval Academy, like name, image, and likeness. The military academy students are not allowed to get money for their name, image, and likeness. There's already a memorandum out there. So our students aren't going to be able to participate in that change. So I don't need to ask anybody because we can't do it. Some of the other, I don't even know what other issues. I mean, our SWA pushes out a lot of issues to our coaches and our administrators in athletics. And I get asked as well about many of the other topics recently, some recruiting rules changes, and you name it. She's very good at collecting input from our school to then pass up to the conference. But I'm not sure there's been too many things that our faculty as a whole, we don't even really, I mean, we look at progress towards degree, but really it's not a concern, because if students are that, if they would not make one of the NCAA wickets, they definitely weren't going to make our 4-year graduation. So we're just so different that we don't have scholarships for athletics. We don't, there's a lot of things that are, I think our faculty are it's a very athlete friendly institution by way of like I said, 1/3 of our students play in our 33 sports. Our faculty know it's part of our mission. Our faculty are very cooperative with students having to miss class. Our faculty are very cooperative to meeting with students outside of class. We don't have any academic support for our student athletes that's any different than anyone else. We don't have any special athletic department support staff for that. So, we are true believers in athletics is totally integrated into the mission of the school and is physically integrated. It's right there. We know our coaches. Some of our coaches are still tenured faculty members. So it's about as connected as you can get. And again, I don't know that I would want to be an FAR at some of the other schools that athletics is this satellite operation that you wouldn't even recognize as part of the college. I think that would be quite frustrating.
Yeah. The tail wagging the dog, so to speak. Yeah. Well, I have to ask you, because this podcast is going to appear during Women's History Month. What's it like to be a female student athlete at the Naval Academy? Any sense of that?
I've been there for 26 years. So when I started, the percentage of females in the student body was around 16%. And now I believe it's up in the upper 20s or close to 30%. And it's been noticeable just as a faculty member and the amount of women that are present. We have a larger percentage of our females that play a varsity sport than we do males. I think it's almost half of our females at the academy play a varsity sport.
Wow.
So I mean, I think they have a great experience. I think they, it's again, a lot better than when I started, just because there's a lot more of them there. And there's, quite honestly, there's more female faculty, there's more female officers that transition through on their tours at the academy. So I think things have constantly improved for our women that have been there since, the first graduating class in the early 1980s. But our student athletes, I think they have a great experience. I've had many of them in class. The female student athletes outperform the non-varsity athlete females academically. So,
Wow.
It's quite a group. And many times you watch the top 100 grads get their names called first, and many of them are our female student athletes walking across the stage.
Pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Well, before we end our conversation, I do have to ask you, I mean, you've been in the throes of college athletics all through COVID-19. What do you see changing, if anything, coming out of this massive disruptive experience in college athletics?
Well, I hope we see that presidential leadership is important. And I think it was very obvious what was going on in the football arena, in the fact that the NCAA had no control over the FBS football, right? That was being decided at the conference level. And that is meant to be a presidential decision. And we were watching them be made. And quite honestly, I was quite proud of some of the conferences that had made some pretty tough decisions early on based on the science that was there. And then things continued to change. And I don't know if the changes were all financially motivated or not, but, with the college football being all the money from the college football playoff going straight to the FBS, and there's no oversight that's just football centric. I think that made it really obvious that the NCAA is not in charge of anything with regard to football and playing their games this year. I think the other piece that I hope survives a little bit is the travel piece. As you know, as a D3 athlete, I'm pretty sure it was very rare we spent the night anywhere before we played a game the next afternoon or the next evening. And we weren't away from campus an awful lot. I would get out of a van, go play a tennis match, get back in a van, right? And I'm not complaining. I think it was great. And my coach was terrific about having us in our classes. So I think with a lot of the travel restrictions, I think people are starting to realize that, maybe we can win in Division I without being gone from campus so much. Maybe we don't have to get to the other school to practice the day before. Their turf isn't that different than ours. Maybe some of these conferences that geographically make no sense something will change. I know there's a few sports out there with their leadership in their sports have asked for some consultants to sort out whether or not maybe there is a way to make it a geographic layout more so than some of these conferences that span regions of the country that just quite frankly don't make sense for a student trying to do academic things. The only saving grace is that even with this bubble that they're proposing for the NCAA tournament is that many of our schools, the classes are all virtual. So the students can still do class. Now, I sure hope someone's checked the Wi-Fi in all those hotels in Indy in case kids are all trying to do class at the same time.
Good point.
Right?
Good point.
But I quite honestly, I hope, and we've done it because our model is an absolutely small classes. Our classes are 20 students or smaller. It's all about in-person instruction. It's all by PhD holding faculty members or military officers with at least a master's degree. I mean, we do not want to be a virtual education institution.
Yeah.
So we're doing everything we can. I've been teaching in person with, some students in front of me, some students in another room, as much as we can in person, because we believe in that. And I truly hope other institutions don't go away from that. I think it's just such a different experience to be sitting there staring at a screen trying to do college. I think so much is lost. But it's been convenient for these athletes, at least during all this, because they still can, if they do get to compete, they still can attend many of their classes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Christine, thank you so much for your time today. I have learned a ton about the Naval Academy and how unique it is, and also the very unique, important roles that you have played in the last several years in navigating, college athletics and its outcomes. So thank you very much.
Oh, I appreciate it. I think I told you this is my only big kid job. It's the only place I interviewed, and I've been here ever since, and I love it. I would talk about the Naval Academy forever, and I'm such a believer in the value of college athletics and what I got from it and what I see others get from it. And it breaks my heart as we watch programs get dropped in this time. I really hope that we can continue to save opportunities for these students, because it really is an educational piece of higher ed. And I just want that to live on for all these students, and so we can strengthen it in some of the sports and bring the higher ed part back to some of these programs that perhaps aren't as rigid. So, but I appreciate your time, and this has been terrific.
Thanks, Christine.